The ER doors burst open at 3:14 a.m., not with panic, but with control. The noise in the room dropped when he walked in. Even the cops waiting near triage straightened up without knowing why. He was tall, broad, dressed in black, so clean it didn't belong in a hospital. His eyes scanned the room once, cold and precise, like he was measuring threats. Behind him, two men rushed in carrying an elderly woman. Her skin was gray. Her chest barely moved. "Help her," the man said. Not loud, not angry, final. Faith Lewis didn't hesitate. "Put her on that bed, now." Her voice cut through the tension, and surprisingly, the men listened. As Faith checked the woman's vitals, she felt it. Every instinct she had was screaming that this man was dangerous. Not loud dangerous, quiet dangerous. The kind that didn't threaten twice. She looked up. He was watching her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. "I'm Faith, senior nurse," she said. "If you want her alive, you step back." For a split second, no one breathed. Then he did. That was when Faith knew this wasn't just a powerful man. This was a man who had never been powerless until tonight. Because as his mother gasped for air, Faith noticed something else. The way his hands trembled, the way his jaw locked, not in anger, but restraint, and the way his eyes dropped when the doctor asked a private question he hadn't answered in 15 years. Faith leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Shh," she said calmly. "Let me take a look." What she was about to uncover would tie her life to his war and force them to trust each other when the city turned violent. Because if this secret left the hospital, men would die trying to bury it. If you've ever cared about a character before knowing how their story ends, subscribe now, because by the time you realize who deserves to survive this, it might already be too late. Now, let's get back into the story. Faith's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she checked vital signs, her mind already running through differential diagnoses with the speed that came from 12 years in emergency medicine. The elderly woman, Mrs. Lee, according to the hastily assembled chart that Gloria thrust into her hands, was clutching her abdomen with trembling fingers, her breathing shallow and rapid, her pulse thready and weak at 98 beats per minute, temperature of 102.4, blood pressure dropping, all classic signs of something very wrong. "When did the pain start?" Faith asked, not looking up from her patient, her fingers already palpating the abdomen with gentle but firm pressure. "This morning," the man said, his voice tight with controlled fear. "She said it was nothing. She always says it's nothing. Right lower quadrant tenderness, guarding, possible rebound." Faith murmured, more to herself than anyone else. She looked up at the charge nurse. "Get me a surgical consult, stat, full sepsis workup, CBC, metabolic panel, and get an IV started. 2 lines, push fluids." Then she glanced at the man hovering like a storm cloud ready to break, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw so tight she could see the muscle jumping. "Acute appendicitis, possibly ruptured based on the presentation and timeline. We need to get her to surgery immediately." She straightened to her full height, all 260 pounds of professional authority, and met his gaze without flinching. "You need to step back so we can work." "I don't take orders," he said, but there was something in his voice, a crack in the armor, a desperation that leaked through despite his best efforts to contain it. Faith moved closer, close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes, close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive, something with sandalwood and bergamot, and the faint copper scent of old violence that never quite washed away. "In this room, you absolutely do. You want your mother to live? Then move, now. Because every second you stand there blocking my team is a second closer to that appendix rupturing completely. And if that happens, her chances drop from 90% to 50%. So I'm going to ask you one more time, politely, step back." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe respect, possibly attraction, though neither of them would admit it yet. He stepped back, his movements controlled and deliberate. The next 2 hours blurred together in the way that trauma cases always did. Faith coordinated with the surgical team, her years of ER experience kicking in as she managed the pre-op prep with the kind of competence that came from saving lives in neighborhoods where gunshot wounds were a Tuesday night routine and stabbings barely rated a mention in the local news. She'd seen dangerous men before. Gang members with tear tattoos who bled out on her table, cartel enforcers who threatened her even as she saved their lives, dirty cops who looked at her like she was less than human. She recognized the markers on this man, the way his assistants positioned themselves to watch all exits and potential threats, the expensive watch on his wrist that could buy a house in the suburbs, the tattoos peeking from beneath his collar that spoke of affiliations she'd rather not know about, the way everyone in the ER gave him a wide berth, except the ones too drunk or high to notice danger when it stood 6 feet tall in Italian leather shoes. But she'd also seen the raw, unfiltered fear on his face when his mother stopped breathing for 12 eternal seconds during intubation, the way his knuckles went white as he gripped the back of the waiting room chair, the barely audible Korean prayer that slipped from his lips. That was real. That was human. That was the part of him that violence hadn't managed to kill yet. Faith found herself watching him during the quiet moments. The way he checked his phone constantly, barking orders in rapid Korean that made his associates jump to attention. The way he paced the waiting room like a caged predator, 5 steps one direction, pivot, 5 steps back. The way he refused coffee and water and every other comfort offered, as if accepting care would be a weakness he couldn't afford. When Mrs. Lee was finally wheeled into surgery, her vitals stabilized but still precarious, Faith found him in the family consultation room. He was sitting with his head in his hands, elbows braced on his knees, shoulders hunched, the first time he'd looked anything other than dangerous. The 2 associates stood guard outside the door, giving them privacy but remaining close enough to respond to any threat. "The surgeon is Dr. Michaels. Excellent, one of the best in the city," Faith said quietly, sitting 2 chairs away. Professional distance, even though something told her this man didn't understand distances, didn't respect boundaries unless they were enforced with violence. "Your mother is strong. Her vitals responded well to fluids and antibiotics. She'll make it through." He looked up, and she saw exhaustion carved into features too young for such hardness. He couldn't be older than 37, maybe 38, but his eyes looked ancient, haunted by things Faith could only imagine. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're scared, and I've learned that fear is universal." Faith folded her hands in her lap, noting the way his eyes tracked the movement, always alert, always assessing. Rich, poor, powerful, powerless, everyone bleeds the same red on my table. Everyone feels fear the same way. You're human, Mr. Lee, no matter how much you might want to pretend otherwise. "I'm not." He stopped, seemed to recalibrate, his expression shifting from defensive to something more genuine. "People don't usually speak to me this way." "Well, I'm not most people." Faith allowed herself a small smile. "And something tells me you're used to people being afraid of you. I'm too tired to be afraid tonight. Been on shift for 16 hours, my feet are killing me, and I've seen 3 gunshot wounds, 2 stabbings, and one guy who thought he could fly off his apartment balcony while high on PCP. You're gonna have to work a lot harder to scare me." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost human. "Lee Min-ho, Faith Lewis." "But you heard that already." She studied him openly, noting the slight limp when he'd walked in, the way he favored his left side, the old pain that never quite left his eyes. "You're injured. Old wound, I'm guessing. The way you're sitting is compensating for chronic pain in your ribs, left side." His eyebrows rose. "You're observant. Nurse in a Chicago ER. You learn to read people fast or you don't survive. Body language tells me everything I need to know. Who's high, who's carrying weapons, who's going to try to run before we can treat them. You're carrying at least 1 gun, probably 2. You're in constant pain, and you haven't slept properly in at least 3 days based on the shadows under your eyes and the way you're moving. Am I wrong?" Lee Min-ho stared at her for a long moment, and something like respect flickered across his face. "Not wrong. Unsettlingly accurate, actually." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that felt less awkward than it should have. The muted sounds of the hospital filtered through the walls, distant beeping, muffled conversations, the squeak of gurney wheels on linoleum. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter now, more genuine. "You're very good at your job." "I'd better be. I'm drowning in student debt to prove it." She immediately regretted the words, showing vulnerability to a man who probably ate vulnerability for breakfast and used it to destroy his enemies. But he only nodded thoughtfully. American healthcare system. Criminal enterprise disguised as medicine. They charge you hundreds of thousands for an education, then pay you barely enough to survive while administrators get rich. Faith laughed, a real one that surprised her. Says the man in the... She stopped herself, caution reasserting itself. In the what? His eyes were sharp now, assessing, calculating what she'd been about to say. In the very expensive suit, she finished smoothly, though they both knew that wasn't what she'd meant. At 3 a.m. on a Thursday, with associates who move like military. Most people don't have that kind of liquidity or that kind of backup. Most people don't have my obligations. He leaned back carefully, favoring that left side again, studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but instead felt like being seen for the first time in months, maybe years. You're observant, Faith Lewis. That's either very smart or very dangerous in this city. Can't it be both? She checked her watch. Almost 5 a.m. Her shift should have ended 2 hours ago, but the ER was slammed and they were short-staffed as always. I should get back to the floor, but your mother will be out of surgery in about 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours. Someone will update you every 30 minutes, and I'll check in before I leave. She stood to leave, her body protesting the movement after so many hours on her feet, but his voice stopped her at the door. Thank you for treating her like she mattered. Faith turned back, struck by the raw honesty in his voice. Everyone matters in my ER, Mr. Lee. That's not negotiable. I don't care if you're a CEO or homeless, a saint or a, she chose her next word carefully, businessman with complicated affiliations. When you're bleeding on my table, you're just human. That's the only thing that matters. She walked away, feeling his eyes on her back, burning between her shoulder blades with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. Something in her gut, the same instinct that had kept her alive in dangerous neighborhoods for 12 years, said this wouldn't be the last time she saw Lee Min-ho. She just hoped it wouldn't get her killed. Before we continue, have you ever met someone you knew was dangerous but felt drawn to anyway? Tell me in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. And if this story has you hooked, like and subscribe to Love and Tension. Now, let's see what happens when Lee comes back. 3 days later, Faith was restocking exam room supplies, gauze, alcohol prep pads, the endless inventory that kept an ER running, when Gloria, the unit secretary with the best gossip radar in 3 counties, appeared in the doorway with an expression somewhere between amused and concerned. That scary hot Asian guy is back, asking for you specifically, by name. Gloria's eyebrows were practically in her hairline. Girl, what did you do? Faith's stomach did something complicated, a flip that was part anxiety, part anticipation. Mrs. Lee okay? She's being discharged today, full recovery, but he's been waiting in the family consultation room for 20 minutes, won't talk to anyone else, won't leave until he talks to you. His bodyguards are making everyone nervous. Gloria leaned in conspiratorially. Also, he brought flowers, expensive ones, the kind that cost more than my rent. Faith's pulse kicked up despite her best efforts to remain calm. Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes. She took her time, finishing the supply inventory with deliberate care, washing her hands twice, checking her reflection in the bathroom mirror, and hating herself for caring what she looked like. Her scrubs were clean, at least, her hair was behaving, and the dark circles under her eyes were only moderately horrifying. Faith found him standing by the window of the consultation room, looking out at the Chicago skyline with the kind of stillness that suggested coiled violence held in check by sheer force of will. He turned when she entered, and she noticed he looked different, less storm cloud, more tired, human. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by dark jeans and a black button-down that probably still cost more than her monthly salary, but looked almost casual on him. "Mr. Lee, is everything all right with your mother? She's recovering well. Better than the doctors expected, actually. She's complaining about the food and demanding to go home, which they tell me is a good sign." He pulled something from his jacket, an envelope, cream-colored and expensive-looking. "I wanted to express my gratitude properly." Faith didn't touch it, keeping her hands firmly at her sides. "If that's money, I can't accept it. I was doing my job, that's all. It's not money, it's a phone number. Direct line." He set it on the table between them, his movements careful and deliberate. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, you call this number, day or night, no questions asked. In my culture, saving a life creates a debt that must be repaid. I don't take debts lightly, Faith Lewis. And in my culture, we just say thank you and move on with our lives." But Faith's curiosity was piqued despite herself, despite every warning bell going off in her head. "What kind of anything are we talking about?" His eyes met hers, and there was something dark and honest in them, the kind of honesty that came from a man who'd stopped pretending to be something he wasn't, the kind of anything that most people can't access. Problems that disappear, doors that open, protection when the system fails you, medical bills that get resolved, student loans that become manageable, people who are bothering you who suddenly find other interests. That sounds suspiciously like you're not a hedge fund manager or a tech entrepreneur. I'm not. No elaboration, just that stark admission hanging between them like a blade. Faith should have walked away, should have handed the card back and forgotten this ever happened, should have filed the report with security and never thought about Lee Min-ho again. Instead, she heard herself say, "Your mother mentioned something while she was coming out of anesthesia about how you built an empire from ash and blood. That real or the morphine talking?" "Both." Lee Min-ho moved closer, and Faith noticed for the first time that he limped slightly, old injury favoring his left side, exactly as she'd suspected. "I'm not going to lie to you, Faith Lewis. I'm not a good man. I've done things that would make you lose sleep. I've hurt people, killed people, destroyed lives to build what I have. But I'm a man who pays his debts, and I owe you one. A big one. Why do I get the feeling calling that number would complicate my life considerably? Because you're smart enough to know that my world doesn't touch yours without consequences." He moved toward the door, his limp more pronounced now. He'd been standing too long, the old pain flaring up. "But the number is there if you need it. Sometimes the system fails people like us. When it does, people like me are what's left." He was almost gone when Faith's mouth betrayed her better judgment. "What's wrong with you?" He turned, eyebrow raised in genuine surprise. "Excuse me? Medically, you're favoring your left side. Your gait suggests chronic pain radiating from your ribs. You had a stress response during your mother's surgery that wasn't just fear. Your blood pressure was elevated. You were sweating despite the air conditioning, and you had to sit down twice. Plus, whatever medications you're on are causing slight hand tremors." Faith crossed her arms, falling into her clinical assessment mode. "I'm a nurse. I notice things. So what's wrong with you?" For a long moment, he just stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then, incredibly, he laughed, a real, genuine sound that transformed his face from dangerous to devastatingly handsome, from intimidating to almost approachable. "You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. Answer the question." "Old bullet wound. 3, actually, but 1 was the problem. Shattered ribs, collapsed lung, damaged nerves. Emergency surgery saved my life but left complications. The pain is manageable, mostly." He hesitated, and something vulnerable crossed his features, something that made him look younger and infinitely more human. "There are other complications, long-term effects of trauma. Nothing that concerns you." But the way he said it, the careful way he chose his words, the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes, made Faith's clinical instincts fire on all cylinders. "Spit it out. I've heard everything, literally everything. You cannot shock me. Erectile dysfunction. For 15 years. Since the injury." The words came out flat, matter of fact, but Faith saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched into fists. "The doctors say it's psychological trauma combined with nerve damage. Some things break and stay broken. I've accepted it. Faith processed this information with clinical detachment, even as something in her chest tightened at the vulnerability in his admission. This man who controlled empires through violence, admitting to the most intimate kind of brokenness. Have you tried everything? Western medicine, traditional Korean approaches, acupuncture, therapy, every medication on the market, and several that aren't. I've seen specialists in 5 countries. Nothing works. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Some things break and stay broken, Faith. That's just reality. Nothing stays broken if you haven't tried my approach yet, Faith said before she could stop herself, her nurse's instinct to heal overriding every bit of common sense she possessed. His eyebrows rose. Your approach? Holistic intervention, combination of physical therapy, psychological counseling, and actually addressing the trauma instead of medicating around it. You're treating symptoms, not cause. Your body is protecting you from vulnerability by shutting down. It's a defense mechanism. Your nervous system learned that vulnerability equals death, so it's keeping you in permanent survival mode. She grabbed a notepad from the desk, already scribbling notes. The physical damage is real, but it's not insurmountable. What you need is, are you offering to fix me, Faith Lewis? The way he said her name sent an inappropriate shiver down her spine, low and intimate, like a caress. I'm offering a medical consultation, nothing more, nothing less. And what would this consultation entail? Faith met his eyes, seeing the hope and fear warring in their depths. You'd have to trust me, completely. Let me examine you properly, get your full medical history, run tests. It would require absolute honesty about your injury, your lifestyle, your stress levels, everything. Can you do that? The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to examine too closely. Outside the consultation room, the hospital continued its endless rhythm, codes being called, patients arriving, lives being saved and lost in equal measure. Finally, Lee Min-ho nodded slowly. When? I'm off Friday nights. There's a clinic I volunteer at. Quiet, private, no questions asked. Community health center in Pilsen. We treat people who can't afford regular care. Faith wrote down the address on a piece of paper, her handwriting quick and efficient. 9 p.m. Come alone. We'll do a full evaluation. He took the paper, his fingers brushing hers briefly. Calloused, scarred, warm. You're either going to save me or destroy me, Faith Lewis. Let's hope for option 1. Faith headed for the door, then looked back, committing his face to memory. The sharp angles, the old pain in his eyes, the vulnerability he'd shown her. And, Mr. Lee, don't bring your entourage, just you. This requires privacy and trust, and I can't give you either if you're surrounded by bodyguards. Dangerous going alone to meet a man like me in an empty clinic at night. Faith smiled, feeling reckless and alive in a way she hadn't in years. Good thing I'm not most people. 9 p.m. Friday. Don't be late. She walked away before she could change her mind, before common sense could reassert itself, before she could fully process that she'd just agreed to privately treat a man who'd essentially admitted to being a crime lord. Her mama always said she had more curiosity than sense. Looked like mama was right. The Friday clinic was in a neighborhood Faith knew well, Pilsen, where gentrification fought against decades of working-class Latino culture, where violence and poverty created the patients no one else wanted to treat. She'd been volunteering here for 3 years. Every Friday night she wasn't pulling ER shifts, treating gunshot wounds without reporting them, removing bullets from teenagers who couldn't go to hospitals, stitching up domestic violence victims who couldn't afford to leave their abusers. It was the kind of place where dangerous men were common, which meant Lee Min-ho would blend in perfectly. He arrived exactly at 9. Alone as requested, wearing dark jeans and a simple black t-shirt that somehow made him look more dangerous than the expensive suits. The shirt stretched across his shoulders and chest, revealing a body that was lean muscle and old scars. Faith led him through the quiet clinic. Most volunteers had left by 8, leaving her alone with her medical supplies and her questionable decision-making skills. This way, she said, leading him to a private exam room in the back, the kind they used for sensitive cases, sexual assault exams, undocumented immigrants, people with warrants who still needed medical care. Sit, she instructed, pulling on gloves and organizing her supplies with practiced efficiency: blood pressure cuff, stethoscope, examination instruments, her tablet for notes. This is a judgment-free zone. Whatever you tell me stays between us. Medical confidentiality is sacred to me. I don't care if you're wanted by the FBI. When you're in this room, you're my patient. That's all. Even if I told you I've killed people? Faith paused in her preparations, meeting his eyes steadily. Are you planning to kill anyone in this clinic tonight? No. Are you a danger to me right now? Never. The certainty in his voice was absolute. Then we're fine. Now tell me about the injury. Everything. Start from the beginning. The story came out in clinical details. Ambushed at 22 by a rival organization. 3 bullets in quick succession. One that shattered his ribs and collapsed his left lung. Another that grazed his liver. A third that lodged near his spine. Emergency surgery that saved his life but left damage the surgeons couldn't fully repair. 6 weeks in the hospital, 3 months of brutal physical therapy, the psychological trauma of nearly dying, of being vulnerable, of almost losing everything he'd built, the pressure of taking over his father's organization while still recovering, of having to prove he wasn't weak, of never being allowed to show pain or fear or any human weakness. The 15 years of trying to fix something that seemed permanently broken, of consulting doctors and specialists and healers, of trying every treatment and medication and therapy, all while maintaining the appearance of strength his position demanded. Faith listened, asked targeted questions, took notes on her tablet. Then she moved to physical examination, palpating the old scarring with professional detachment, even though her mind was racing with diagnostic possibilities. The scarring was extensive, raised and ropey across his left ribs, the kind that came from trauma surgery done in emergency conditions. She could feel where the ribs had been reconstructed, where metal pins still held bone fragments together. His breathing was slightly asymmetrical, the left lung never quite expanding fully. "Deep breath," she instructed, listening with her stethoscope. Diminished lung sounds on the left, as expected. Heart rate elevated, but steady. Any chronic pain? Constant. Worse in cold weather or when I'm stressed, which is always. Medications? Prescription NSAIDs. I don't take opioids. Can't afford to be impaired. Faith continued her examination, noting muscle tension patterns, checking reflexes, assessing range of motion. His body was a map of violence. Old knife scars on his abdomen, a bullet scar on his right shoulder, burns on his left forearm that looked like cigarette torture. "You can get dressed," she said finally, pulling off her gloves and moving to her desk to organize her notes. Lee Min-ho pulled his shirt back on, moving carefully, and Faith saw the way he protected his left side. Automatic, unconscious. "Verdict?" "Okay," she said, turning to face him. "I have good news and complicated news. Start with complicated. The nerve damage is real but not irreparable. Nerve tissue can regenerate under the right conditions, though it takes time. Your body's stress response is so heightened that it's essentially shut down all non-essential functions to keep you in permanent survival mode. You've been living in fight or flight for 15 years, Lee. Your nervous system never received the signal that the threat is over, that it's safe to stand down." Faith pulled up a chair, sitting so they were eye level, speaking to him as a person rather than lecturing from authority. "Your body doesn't feel safe enough to be vulnerable, and sexual function requires complete vulnerability, both physical and psychological. You have to feel safe enough to let your guard down completely. And the good news? It's treatable. Difficult, requiring months of work, but treatable." Faith leaned forward, her expression serious. "But it requires you to feel safe, which means addressing the psychological component, the PTSD, the hypervigilance, the trauma responses. You'd need specialized therapy, probably PTSD-specific treatment with someone who understands complex trauma, combined with gradual physical therapy to retrain your nervous system's stress responses. She pulled up treatment protocols on her tablet, showing him studies and success rates. There are techniques: somatic experiencing, EMDR, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, combined with physical interventions like pelvic floor therapy, cardiovascular conditioning to improve circulation, stress reduction practices. The question is whether you're willing to do the work, because I won't lie, it's going to be hard. You'll have to revisit the worst moments of your life, process trauma you've spent 15 years avoiding, learn to feel safe in a life that's objectively dangerous. Lee Min-ho was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. What if I told you that feeling safe is impossible in my line of work, that letting my guard down even for a moment could get me killed? Then I'd say you're choosing survival over living, and that's a decision only you can make. Faith studied his face, seeing the war being waged behind his eyes. But I'd also say that you came here for a reason. Some part of you wants to be whole again, wants to feel something other than pain and hypervigilance, wants to be more than just a survivor. And you think you can make me whole? I think you can make yourself whole if you're willing to trust the process. I'd just be guiding you through it, providing medical oversight, monitoring progress, adjusting treatment protocols. Faith stood, moving to her desk to write down referrals. I have colleagues who specialize in trauma therapy. Discreet, won't ask questions you don't want to answer. Dr. Sarah Park, Korean American, former military psychologist, works with combat veterans and others with complex PTSD. She's seen everything, won't judge, and she knows how to work with high-stress occupations. She wrote down the information, her handwriting quick and efficient. Combined with weekly check-ins with me to monitor physical progress, adjust medications if needed, work on stress reduction and nervous system regulation. Weekly? Faith turned, caught something in his tone. Surprise mixed with something that might have been hope. That a problem? No. He stood, and suddenly the small exam room felt much smaller, the air between them charged with something neither wanted to name. I just wasn't expecting you to be so invested. I'm a nurse. Healing people is what I do. It's not just a job, it's who I am. But even as she said it, Faith knew there was more to it than professional obligation. Something about this dangerous man who'd trusted her with his deepest vulnerability, who'd shown her the wounds violence had carved into his body and soul, made her want to fix what was broken in him, made her want to prove that healing was possible even in the darkest circumstances. When do we start? Next Friday, same time. Bring your full medical records if you have them. I want to see exactly what treatments you've tried, what medications you've been on. She handed him the referral papers and a folder of information. And Lee, this only works if you're honest with me about everything. Your stress levels, your lifestyle, your safety, all of it. I can't help you if you're hiding things. He took the papers, his fingers lingering on hers for a fraction too long. Warm, calloused, real. Call me Lee, just Lee, and I'll try to be honest. It's not something I'm accustomed to. I know, but we'll work on it together. Faith walked him to the clinic's back exit, the one that opened onto an alley where his car was waiting. She'd noticed it earlier, black and expensive and probably bulletproof. One more thing. Yes? Thank you for trusting me with this. I know it wasn't easy. Something flickered in his eyes. Vulnerability, gratitude, something that looked almost like hope. You're the first person I've told the complete truth to in 15 years, so thank you for listening without judgment. As he left, Faith realized she'd just agreed to regular appointments with a man who'd admitted to killing people, who ran criminal organizations, whose world operated on violence and fear. A man whose eyes looked at her like she was the first real thing he'd seen in years, the first person who saw him as human rather than monster. She should be terrified. Instead, she was intrigued, invested, and already planning treatment protocols in her head. Her mama always said she had more heart than sense. Looked like mama was definitely right. Hold up, let me ask you something real quick before we continue. Do you think Faith is making a huge mistake getting involved with Lee's treatment, or is this exactly what both of them need? Is she being naive about the dangers of his world, or is her medical perspective giving her insights others miss? And which character are you rooting for more? Faith, who's risking everything to help someone heal, or Lee, who's trying to become whole again despite his dangerous world? Drop a comment and let me know where you stand. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Love and Tension. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes next. 6 weeks later, Faith was reviewing Lee's progress notes when he arrived for their Friday session. The clinic had become their space, this quiet room where the outside world's rules didn't apply, where he could be vulnerable without consequence, where she could practice healing without the constraints of the medical establishment. He looked different, less rigid, moving with slightly more ease, the perpetual tension in his shoulders reduced by noticeable degrees. The therapy was working, slowly but measurably, and Faith felt a professional satisfaction that went deeper than just clinical success. "How was this week?" Faith asked, gesturing for him to sit on the exam table while she pulled up his chart on her tablet. "Brutal session with Dr. Park on Tuesday. She's relentless. Makes me talk about things I've spent 15 years burying." But there was something almost like humor in his voice, a lightness that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. "Made me recount the night I got shot, in detail, every moment from the ambush to waking up in the ICU. Haven't done that in 15 years. And?" Faith looked up from her notes, studying his face for signs of distress. "And I didn't have a panic attack. My heart rate elevated, I started sweating, but I used those breathing exercises you taught me, and I got through it." He rolled his shoulders, and Faith noticed the movement was smoother, less protective. "She said that's significant progress." "It is. It means your nervous system is learning new responses, that you can revisit trauma without being overwhelmed by it." Faith made notes, documenting the progress. "Any physical changes?" "Some." He met her eyes, and she saw both hope and vulnerability there. "Morning responses. Nothing sustained, nothing I could act on, but it's more than I've had in years. Woke up 3 times this week with partial erections. They didn't last, but they happened. That's significant progress, Lee. Really significant." Faith kept her tone clinical despite the warmth creeping into her cheeks. She'd treated thousands of patients with sexual dysfunction, but somehow this felt different, more personal. "It means your nervous system is starting to feel safe enough to come out of hypervigilance. Your body is remembering how to respond. We're on the right track." They fell into their usual rhythm. Faith asking targeted questions about symptoms, stress levels, sleep quality, dietary habits, all the factors that influenced healing. Lee answering with increasing honesty, the walls between them becoming more permeable with each session. She learned about his organization in careful detail, import-export with selective legal gray areas, protection services, financial enterprises that existed in regulatory shadows, his mother's recovery and increasing meddling. She'd called Faith twice to thank her and hint heavily about grandchildren, her world's peculiar honor code. Violence was acceptable against those who knew the risks, but civilians and families were sacred. He learned about her debt in painful specificity, $230,000 in student loans, monthly payments that ate half her income, the second job she worked on weekends just to stay current, her family situation, parents in Mississippi who hadn't spoken to her in 5 years after she'd refused to lose weight and marry the man they'd chosen, her passion for healing people the system had forgotten, every Friday night for 3 years, treating the uninsured and undocumented, the addicts and sex workers, anyone who needed care without judgment. "You know what's funny?" Lee said during week 8, lying on the exam table as Faith worked on myofascial release around his old injury, her hands pressing into the tight fascia with practiced pressure. "You're the only person who touches me who isn't trying to kill me or fuck me. The only one who touches me like it's safe." Faith's hands paused mid-movement, processing the casual way he'd said something so profound. "I'm your medical provider. That's literally my job." "No, it's more than that. You touch me like I'm human, like I'm not—" He trailed off, staring at the ceiling tiles. "What not?" Faith resumed her work, feeling the tension release under her hands as she worked the scarred tissue. "Not a monster. Like I'm just a person who deserves care." His voice was quiet, vulnerable in a way that made her chest ache. Faith moved to where he could see her face, her expression serious. "You're not a monster, Lee. You're a man who's done monstrous things to survive in a monstrous world. There's a difference, a crucial one. Is there?" The question held genuine uncertainty, years of self-loathing compressed into 2 words. "Yes." She met his eyes with absolute certainty, willing him to believe her. Monsters don't try to heal. Monsters don't spend 8 weeks in trauma therapy facing their worst memories because some nurse told them they could be whole again. Monsters don't protect their mother with such fierce devotion, don't pay their workers fairly, don't have codes about protecting civilians. You're not a monster. You're just deeply wounded, and you did what you had to do to survive. But survival and thriving are different things, and you're finally learning to thrive. Something in his expression cracked open, and for a moment Faith saw the 22-year-old who'd nearly died, who'd had to become something hard and terrible to survive, who'd buried his humanity so deep he'd forgotten it existed. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "For what? For seeing me. For seeing past what I've done to who I might still be underneath." Faith cleared her throat, professional distance reasserting itself even as something warm and complicated bloomed in her chest. "That's what we do here. Now, let's focus on your breathing exercises. Your stress levels this week were still elevated according to your tracking app. What happened?" They worked through the session, Faith guiding him through progressive muscle relaxation and breathing work, teaching him to identify and release tension he didn't even know he was carrying. By the end, his blood pressure had dropped 10 points, and his heart rate had normalized to something almost peaceful. "Better," Faith said, making final notes. "But you need to practice this daily, not just when you're here. 15 minutes every morning, no exceptions." "Yes, ma'am," he said with a slight smile that transformed his face. As he was leaving, Faith found herself saying, "Lee, I'm proud of the work you're doing. I know it's not easy." He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "It's easier because of you, because you believe I can be whole again. That matters more than you know." After he left, Faith sat in the quiet exam room, her clinical notes forgotten, and acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. This wasn't just professional care anymore. Somewhere between the clinical consultations and the vulnerable honesty, something had shifted. She cared about this man, not just as a patient, but as a person. She wanted him to heal, not just for medical success, but because she couldn't bear the thought of him living in pain. She looked forward to Friday nights not just for the volunteer work, but because it meant seeing him, and that was dangerous. For both of them. The ambush happened on a Tuesday night, shattering the careful progress they'd built. Faith was leaving her volunteer shift around 11, later than usual because she'd stayed to treat a teenager with a knife wound that needed careful stitching. The neighborhood was quiet, that particular silence that meant either peace or predators. Her instincts, honed by years in dangerous neighborhoods, screamed warning before her conscious mind registered the threat. The black SUV had been circling the block for 10 minutes. She'd noticed it earlier but hadn't thought much of it. Lots of people drove through Pilsen, but now it was parked across from her car, engine running, windows tinted dark as death. Faith picked up her pace, hand already reaching for her phone to dial Lee's number, which she'd programmed under urgent medical contact, as if that made it less personal. Keys between her fingers like a weapon. 3 men materialized from nowhere, too fast, too coordinated, moving with military precision, professional, dangerous, not random street thugs, but trained operators. Faith Lewis? The one in front smiled, but it was the kind of smile that promised violence, that had seen violence, that would deliver violence without hesitation. "Someone wants to talk to you about your boyfriend." Faith's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady, falling into the calm she used in emergencies. "I don't have a boyfriend." "No? Then why do you spend every Friday night with Lee Min-ho?" He pulled out photos, her and Lee entering the clinic, leaving together, his hand on her back as he walked her to her car, the two of them at a coffee shop near her apartment. When had that been? 2 weeks ago? Brief and innocent, but captured on camera. Cozy relationship for a nurse and her patient, don't you think? Fear turned to cold fury in her gut. Who are you? Friends of friends, associates who have business interests that conflict with Mr. Lee's. He stepped closer, and Faith smelled expensive cologne mixed with the copper tang of violence, gun oil, and threat. See, Lee's been distracted lately, less focused on business, more focused on, he gestured at the photos, personal matters. We think you're the reason. We think you're making him weak. Faith's mind raced through options. Scream? No one would come. Run? They'd catch her. Fight? 3 trained men. Comply? Definitely bad. So what, you're going to threaten me? Hurt me? That'll just make him more focused on revenge, not less. The man laughed. Smart girl. No, we're not going to hurt you. We're going to have a conversation about how you're going to help us. You'll continue seeing Lee, but you'll also... The crack of a gunshot split the night air like lightning. The man in front crumpled, and suddenly Lee was there, emerging from the shadows like an avenging angel or demon. Faith couldn't tell which, with 2 of his people flanking him, his gun still raised and his eyes absolutely cold, calculating, lethal. Run, Faith, now! His voice was ice and fury and barely controlled violence. But Faith Lewis was a trauma nurse. She'd spent years running toward danger, not away from it, toward the bleeding and broken, toward the places where death waited. She dropped to her knees beside the wounded man, her training overriding her fear, her hands already assessing the damage. He's hit in the thigh, femoral arteries intact, but he's losing blood fast. Direct pressure on the wound site now. Faith, get away from him! Lee's voice held genuine alarm. Shut up and give me your belt. She was already applying pressure with her hands, feeling the warm pulse of blood, calculating blood loss and timing. You want answers from him? You want intelligence on who sent them? I need to stabilize him first, or he bleeds out in 4 minutes and you get nothing. Now belt, move. For a frozen second, Lee just stared at her like she'd lost her mind. This woman kneeling in an alley, treating the man who'd been about to kidnap her, ordering around a crime lord like he was a first-year medical student. Then, incredibly, he started laughing, a wild, disbelieving sound that held genuine amazement. You're absolutely insane! I'm a nurse. Now belt, move your ass. She used her command voice, the one that made ER residents jump. He handed it over, watching as Faith fashioned a tourniquet with the kind of efficiency that came from saving gunshot victims in ER bays, from working in neighborhoods where violence was background noise. The other attackers had fled when the shooting started, leaving their colleague bleeding on the concrete, and Faith's careful work. He'll live, Faith said finally, sitting back on her heels, her hands covered in blood, adrenaline making her shake. But he needs a hospital or your equivalent, and someone needs to tell me what the hell just happened. No hospitals, Lee said flatly, already making calls in rapid Korean. We have doctors, secure medical facility. He'll be treated and questioned. His eyes met hers, and she saw genuine anguish beneath the cold control. We need to leave, now. There might be more coming. More what? Who were they? Why did they have photos of us? The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving fear and confusion in its wake. Lee, what did you get me into? What have I gotten myself into? His jaw tightened, muscle jumping with tension. Exactly what I was trying to avoid. This is my fault, Faith. I should have stayed away from you, should have protected you by keeping distance. They ended up at one of his safe houses, a luxury apartment in a building with the kind of security that suggested foreign embassies or witness protection. Bulletproof windows, biometric locks, armed guards in the lobby who nodded respectfully at Lee and looked at Faith with curiosity and assessment. The apartment itself was beautiful in an impersonal way. Expensive furniture, original art, a view of Lake Michigan that probably cost millions, but nothing personal, nothing that said anyone actually lived there. Faith paced while Lee made calls in rapid Korean, his people moving in and out with military efficiency, bringing reports and taking orders. She caught fragments, names, locations, tactical discussions. The wounded man had been moved to their secure facility. Surveillance footage was being reviewed. assets were being mobilized. When he finally turned to her, his face was carved from stone. The Konstantin Bratva, Russian organized crime. They've been trying to move into my territory for 8 months. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking. All the businesses I've specifically kept out of Chicago because they're indefensible ethically. They saw you as leverage against me. Faith's stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. They were going to use me to get to you. Yes. He moved closer, and she saw genuine anguish in his eyes, self-recrimination and fury directed inward. This is why I don't have relationships, Faith. This is why I keep everyone at arm's length. My world doesn't allow for vulnerabilities, for people who matter, for anything that can be used against me. And you... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I'm a vulnerability, Faith finished, her voice flat. You're everything I can't afford to have. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white with tension. But I can't. I'm not strong enough to walk away from you. I've tried. For weeks I've told myself to stop coming to the clinic, to protect you by staying away. But I can't. I'm not strong enough. Faith processed this, her analytical mind working through implications and options despite the emotional turmoil. So what happens now? Now I eliminate the threat, permanently. The coldness in his voice reminded her exactly who she was dealing with, not her patient, not the vulnerable man who'd trusted her with his trauma, but the crime lord who'd built an empire on calculated violence. And you disappear. New identity, new city, new life. I have resources. I can set you up anywhere in the world. New papers, new history, enough money that you never have to work again. You'll be safe. No. Faith, I said no. She squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze with steel she didn't know she possessed. I don't run, and I don't let other people make decisions about my life without my input. This isn't a negotiation. You're damn right it's not. Faith moved into his space, close enough to feel the heat radiating from him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. You want to protect me? Then teach me how to protect myself. You want to eliminate the threat? Then let me help. Let me contribute something other than being a liability. I'm not some delicate flower who needs to be hidden away in a safe location while the menfolk handle the danger. I'm a nurse who's been stitching up gunshot wounds in gang territory for a decade. I know violence. I know danger. I've treated cartel enforcers and gang members and people who would kill me without thinking twice. And I choose to stay anyway. Lee stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You're choosing this? Choosing my world? The violence, the constant threat, the reality that people will try to hurt you just to get to me? I'm choosing to fight instead of run. There's a difference. Faith grabbed his hand, lacing their fingers together, feeling the calluses and scars of violence against her soft nurse's hands. You've spent 8 weeks learning to feel safe enough to be vulnerable, learning to trust me, learning that not everything in life is a threat. Well, guess what? I feel safe with you. Even now, even knowing what you are and what you do, even after being grabbed by Russian mobsters, I feel safer with you than I have with anyone in years. So either we figure this out together, or you're proving that all that therapy was bullshit, and you're still choosing survival over living. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of the choice he was making, with the reality of what she was offering. Finally, Lee pulled her against him, his face buried in her hair, his arms wrapped around her like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. You're gonna get me killed. Or saved, Faith murmured against his chest. Could go either way at this point. You need to understand what you're agreeing to. My world is brutal. If they can't use you as leverage, they'll try to eliminate you outright because you matter to me. You'll need protection, full-time security, armored vehicles, changes to your routine, training in self-defense, weapons, threat assessment. You'll need to understand how my organization works, who the players are, what the rules are. Your entire life will change. Friday nights at the clinic? Probably over. Your apartment? Not secure enough. Your routine? Too predictable. Everything changes. Then change it. Faith pulled back to look at him, seeing the war in his eyes. "But do it with me, not for me. Don't make decisions and inform me. Involve me. Teach me. Let me be your partner in this. I'm all in, Lee. The question is whether you are. Whether you can trust me not just with your trauma, but with your world." He kissed her then, fierce and desperate and full of the vulnerability he'd been learning to access, full of fear and hope and need. When they broke apart, his eyes held a new determination. "Okay," he said, "together. But we do this my way. Strategically, carefully, with every advantage we can build. You follow security protocols without question. You train with my people. You learn the rules of this world. And the Russians?" His smile was sharp and cold, the crime lord reasserting itself. "They threatened what's mine. That requires a response they'll understand, a response that makes it clear that touching you means death." The next 2 weeks were a crash course in Lee's world that left Faith's head spinning and her understanding of reality fundamentally altered. She learned about territories and tributaries, how Chicago's underworld was divided among various organizations, each with their own domains and rules. Lee controlled the south and west sides primarily, with fingers in Chinatown and influence stretching into the suburbs. She learned about the businesses that funded his organization, legitimate import-export companies that also moved goods the government frowned upon, real estate holdings that laundered money and provided legitimate income, protection services for businesses in dangerous neighborhoods, financial enterprises that existed in legal gray areas but provided services banks wouldn't. She met his inner circle, hard-eyed men and women who regarded her with suspicion until she calmly treated a knife wound during a meeting, one of Lee's enforcers slashed in a dispute over territory, and never flinched, never judged, just stitched and dressed the wound with the same care she'd give anyone. "She's solid," Yuri Chen told Lee after that incident. His name itself was a contradiction. Yuri Chen, Chinese mother, Russian father, utterly loyal to Lee despite his mixed heritage making him an outsider in most organizations. He'd been Lee's second-in-command for 8 years, had saved Lee's life twice, and regarded Faith with calculating interest. Steady hands, steady mind. The Bratva miscalculated. They saw a weakness. She's a weapon they didn't account for. Faith also started self-defense training with Reina Torres, a former Israeli defense operative who left the military after 12 years and now handled Lee's personal security. Reina was 5'4" of concentrated lethality, with scarred knuckles and eyes that had seen too much death. The first session left Faith bruised and humbled and slightly terrified. "You're strong," Reina said, helping Faith up from the mat after throwing her for the 6th time. "Your work gives you core strength and good instincts, but you fight like you're trying not to hurt anyone, like you're still thinking about healing. In this world, you need to fight like you're trying to end the threat. First strike, no mercy, incapacitate and run." Faith adapted, driven by the memory of those men in the alley, by the knowledge that hesitation could mean death. She learned pressure points and eye strikes, how to use her weight as an advantage rather than a liability, where to aim to disable an attacker. Reina was a harsh but effective teacher. "Good," Reina said, after Faith successfully executed a defense sequence. "Now again, faster. In a real situation, you'll have maybe 2 seconds before they recover. Make 'em count." Meanwhile, intelligence confirmed that the Bratva wasn't backing down. They saw Faith as an insult that needed to be corrected, and Lee's protection of her as weakness to exploit. More concerning, they'd put out feelers to other organizations, trying to build a coalition against Lee. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after the ambush. Lee's tech specialist, a genius named Hakeem Rodriguez who looked 16 but was actually 32, cracked the Bratva's communication network after days of patient work. "They're planning something big," Hakeem explained, pulling up encrypted messages on multiple screens in his command center, lines of code scrolling faster than Faith could follow. "Not just surveillance or another grab attempt. They're bringing in an outside contractor, specialist from overseas, former Spetsnaz, multiple confirmed kills. They're planning a hit. On Faith? Lee's voice was ice and controlled fury. Not directly. They're smarter than that. They know she's protected now. No, they're targeting the processing facility, your main distribution hub for the import business. Hakeem pulled up building schematics and staff schedules. They want to cripple your supply chain, kill your workers, force you to the negotiating table, make you choose between your business and faith. When? Lee leaned forward, his mind already strategizing. Saturday night, during the shift change at 11 p.m., maximum casualties, maximum damage, maximum psychological impact. Faith's nursing instincts fired immediately. How many people work that shift? How many potential casualties? 32 regular staff, Lee said quietly, his face grim. Mostly immigrants, people who need jobs no one else will give them because of visa status or criminal records or language barriers. They're under my protection. They work for me because I pay fair wages and don't ask questions and provide security. If the Bratva kills them, his jaw clenched. It's not just business, it's personal. Then we protect them, Faith said immediately, her mind already working through scenarios. We evacuate, set a trap, turn their plan against them. Lee looked at her like she was speaking another language. This isn't a medical emergency, Faith. This is war. You don't set traps and evacuate. You hit first, hit hard, eliminate the threat. War has casualties. Medical emergencies have casualties. I don't accept casualties in either scenario. She moved to the table covered with surveillance photos and building schematics, studying the layout with tactical eyes she was learning to develop. What if we use my volunteer clinic as a staging ground? It's 3 blocks from the facility, has medical supplies for treating wounded, and the Bratva knows I'm connected to it. We make them think I'll be there, vulnerable and accessible. They'll split their forces, send someone to grab me while the main team hits the facility. We catch them coming and going. You want to use yourself as bait? Lee's voice was flat, dangerous. I want to use their assumptions against them. They see me as your weakness, as leverage they can exploit. Let's prove them catastrophically wrong. Faith traced routes on the map with her finger, her nursing background giving her insights into patient flow and evacuation procedures. We evacuate the workers under cover of a gas leak. Emergency protocol looks legitimate, gets them clear. We set up surveillance at the facility to catch the Bratva team in the act, and we neutralize whoever comes for me with overwhelming force. Yuri leaned forward, his eyes sharp with tactical assessment. It could work if we coordinate timing perfectly, use her as the attractive target while we secure the real objective. No, Lee said flatly. Absolutely not. I'm not putting Faith in the crosshairs deliberately. I'm already in the crosshairs, Faith countered, meeting his eyes steadily. This way, I'm in them with backup, with a plan, with every advantage we can manufacture. Doing nothing just means waiting for them to make the next move on their terms, with timing and tactics we don't control. This gives us initiative. She has a point, boss, Reyna added, arms crossed as she studied the maps. Defensive positioning is weak in this scenario. They have the advantage of choosing timing and method. This gives us control back. We choose the ground, we choose the timing, we dictate the engagement. Lee looked around the table at his people. Yuri, Reyna, Hakeem, 3 others who joined the planning session, all nodding in agreement. Tactical minds recognizing sound strategy. Then back at Faith, seeing the determination in her eyes. If we do this, and I mean if, you follow my orders exactly. No improvisation, no heroics, no nursing instincts that make you run toward danger. You stay where it's safe until we confirm the threat is completely neutralized. Non-negotiable. Agreed, Faith said immediately, though they both knew she was lying, knew that her instincts would override orders if people needed help. The plan came together over the next 48 hours with military precision. Lee's people would handle the facility, securing the building after evacuation, setting up surveillance, preparing to catch the Bratva team in the act. Faith would be at the clinic with Reyna and 2 others, visible enough through windows to draw attention, but protected by walls that had been reinforced and weapons hidden throughout. The Saturday arrived with tension thick as fog and twice as obscuring. Faith was at the clinic by 7 p.m., going through her normal volunteer routine, treating a sprained ankle, dispensing antibiotics for an ear infection, counseling a young woman on birth control options. Very visibly alone, except for the security she knew was hidden in shadows and on rooftops, watching, waiting. Lee had wanted to be with her, but she'd convinced him he needed to be at the facility. "Your people need to see you leading," she'd told him that morning. "That's how you win this, not just by protecting me, but by showing you're still in control, still strong, still the leader they follow. If you're hiding with me, it suggests they've made you weak. You need to be visible where it matters." At 9:47 p.m., Hakeem's voice crackled through the comm unit Faith wore hidden under her scrub top. "Movement at the facility. 3 vehicles approaching. 8 hostiles confirmed. Armed, tactical gear. They're moving in." At 9:53 p.m., Raina touched Faith's shoulder from her position by the window. 2 approaching the clinic from the north alley. 1 from the south. Professional spacing. Coordinated timing. They're isolating the exits, like we predicted. Faith's heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady as she continued organizing medical supplies, performing her role. How long until Lee's team can move? They need to wait until the Bratva commits at the facility, enters the building. Timing's critical. Too early and they scatter. Too late and they damage the facility. Raina's hand rested on her concealed weapon. "Stay calm. We've trained for this." The clinic door opened with a soft chime that sounded like death's knock. A man walked in, mid-30s, expensive suit inappropriate for the neighborhood, dead eyes that had seen too much violence and felt too little remorse. "Faith Lewis? That's me." She didn't look up from her supply inventory, playing her role. "If you're here for treatment, I need you to fill out these forms first. We're a free clinic, but we still need basic information." "I'm not here for treatment. I'm here to deliver a message from Konstantin Volkov." He pulled a gun with casual ease, like pulling car keys. "He'd like to discuss your relationship with Lee Min-ho. You'll come with us quietly, or things get messy for everyone." Faith finally looked up, meeting his eyes with the calm she'd learned from Lee, with the steel she'd found in herself over these weeks. "I don't discuss my patients. Medical confidentiality. That's unfortunate, because Mr. Volkov insists," and Raina moved like lightning incarnate. One shot, center mass, the man dropping before he could finish his threat. Instantly, the clinic erupted with chaos, glass shattering as more Bratva enforcers forced entry from multiple points, gunfire peppering the walls, shouts in Russian and English. "Get down!" Raina shoved Faith behind the reinforced desk they'd prepared, returning fire with controlled precision. Faith's training kicked in. This was just another trauma situation. Chaos, violence, screaming, the need to stay calm and functional. She grabbed the go bag of medical supplies they'd prepared, her mind already running through triage protocols. The wounded would need treatment. Maybe some of Lee's people. Maybe, her conscience whispered, even the enemy. Through her comm unit, she heard Lee's voice, tight with controlled fury and barely suppressed panic. "Faith, status. 3 hostiles in the clinic, 1 down, active engagement ongoing." Gunfire punctuated her words. "What's happening at the facility?" "They're inside, planting explosives. We're moving to contain. Yuri's team is..." Loud bangs, more gunfire. "If anything happens to you..." "Nothing's going to happen to me. I have Raina, and she's terrifying. Go, protect your people. End this." The firefight lasted 4 minutes that felt like hours compressed into heartbeats. Raina and her team were professionals, economical, efficient, lethal. Each shot meant something. Each movement had purpose. When the last Bratva enforcer dropped, Faith was already moving before the smoke cleared, checking vitals, applying pressure to wounds. "He's alive," she called to Raina, kneeling beside one of the attackers. "Femoral arteries compromised, but savable. I need..." "Let him bleed," Raina said flatly. "He came here to kill you." "No." Faith worked with single-minded focus, her hands shirred despite the adrenaline. "We need information about their operation, their employer, their plans. Dead men don't talk. Plus," she added with dark humor that surprised herself, "I took an oath, even for assholes who try to kidnap me." Reyna laughed, a sharp bark of sound that held genuine respect. Boss chose well with you, Faith. You're either crazy or brilliant. Can't it be both? 20 minutes later, Lee burst through the clinic door like an avenging angel, his face a mask of controlled violence that shattered into relief when he saw Faith, blood-stained but whole, calmly bandaging a wound on her own arm. "Facilities secure," he said, pulling her against him with barely controlled desperation. "All workers safe, evacuated before the Bratva arrived. 8 Bratva operatives in custody, 2 killed in the firefight. The explosives were—" He stopped, seemed to really see her. "You're hurt." "Graze from flying glass, nothing serious." Faith gestured to the wounded Bratva enforcer she'd stabilized. "This one's talking, already told us everything about their operation, their contractor, their employer's location. Funny how gratitude works when someone saves your life after you tried to kill them." Lee stared at the wounded man, then at Faith, then laughed, a sound of disbelief and admiration. "You saved his life after he tried to kidnap you? He's more useful alive. Plus, healing is what I do. I can't turn it off just because someone's an asshole." She finished securing her own bandage. "Now let's use what he told us and end this before they try again." The aftermath was swift and brutal, carried out with the precision Lee's organization was known for. Using intelligence from the wounded Bratva operative, Lee's people dismantled the Konstantin Bratva's Chicago operations in 72 hours, a coordinated strike that was so efficient, so comprehensive, that the other organizations took notice and reconsidered any thoughts of challenging him. Faith stayed out of the violence itself, but treated the wounded on both sides. Lee's people who'd been hurt in the facility raid even captured Bratva members who needed medical care before interrogation. Her clinic became a neutral ground that even Lee's enemies respected, a place where the rules of war didn't apply. "You're making me soft," Lee told her a week later, watching as she taught his people basic first aid and trauma response. 6 months ago, I would have just eliminated everyone and sorted it out later. Now I'm running a medical training program." "You're not soft, you're strategic." Faith finished demonstrating a tourniquet application, her hands sure and practiced. "Dead enemies can't give intelligence about other threats. Treated enemies sometimes switch sides when they realize you value life more than rival organizations do. It's practical, not soft. Plus, your people need these skills. The faster they can stabilize each other in the field, the better your survival rates. Keep telling yourself that." But he was smiling, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his face from dangerous to devastatingly handsome. A month after the confrontation, they were in Lee's office, the real one, not the public-facing space, but the inner sanctum where he actually conducted business, when Yuri brought news. Volkov's pulling out. His bosses in Moscow aren't happy about the losses. 8 operatives dead or captured, their Chicago operations completely dismantled, $2 million in assets seized. They're cutting their losses and pulling out of Chicago entirely. Yuri looked at Faith with something like respect. "You made an impression." Some of his people said they'd never seen someone treat enemies with kindness. It confused them, made them question their orders. "Confusion is a weapon," Faith said, then caught Lee's proud expression. "What? You sound like me. You're learning the language of this world." God, that's terrifying. But she was smiling, feeling the warmth of belonging despite the darkness of the world she'd entered. That night, in Lee's penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Faith found him on the balcony staring out at the city lights. His city, his empire, his responsibility. "Penny for your thoughts?" He turned, and his expression was complicated. Vulnerability and strength mixed together in equal measure. "I'm not fixed, Faith. The therapy, the physical progress, it's helping. Dr. Park says I'm making breakthrough progress, but I'm still broken in ways that might not heal. The dysfunction is improving, but not resolved. I still have nightmares. I still live in a world of violence." "No one's asking you to be fixed," Faith said, moving into his arms, feeling his heart beat against her cheek. "I'm asking you to be whole, There's a difference. Whole means accepting all your parts, the violence and the tenderness, the monster and the man, the crime lord and the son who loves his mother. You don't have to choose one or the other. You can be both. And you can accept both? Can love both? I already do. I've seen what you're capable of, Lee. The violence, the ruthlessness, the cold calculation that runs an empire. I've also seen your loyalty to people others have discarded, your protection of people who can't protect themselves, the way you're learning to be vulnerable despite 15 years of trauma telling you it'll kill you. I've seen you laugh at my terrible jokes and cry during therapy and hold your mother's hand like she's made of glass. She pulled back to look at him, holding his gaze. You're not a monster. You're just a man doing monstrous things in a world that demands it for survival. And I choose to stand beside you anyway. I choose you, all of you, with full knowledge of what that means. He kissed her then, slow and deep and reverent, full of promises neither could voice, but both understood. When they broke apart, something had shifted between them, a solidifying of partnership that went beyond romance into something more fundamental, more permanent. I love you, he said against her lips, the words raw and honest, even though it's the most dangerous thing I've ever admitted, even though it makes me vulnerable in ways that could destroy everything I've built. I love you too, even though you're probably going to get me killed or arrested or both. Never. He vowed with absolute certainty. I'll burn this city down before I let anyone hurt you. See, that's the kind of sweet talk that makes a girl's heart flutter, Faith said with a laugh, but she meant it. In Lee's world, such promises weren't hyperbole, they were commitment. The physical progress continued over the following weeks, slowly, gradually, as his nervous system learned to feel safe enough for complete vulnerability. 3 months after the Bratva incident, Lee woke in the middle of the night to find Faith watching him with a clinical but deeply satisfied expression. What? He asked groggily, still half asleep. You had a complete, sustained physiological response during REM sleep. 5 minutes duration, no intervention needed, no conscious stimulation, just your body finally believing it's safe enough. She kissed his forehead, then his lips. You're healing, Lee, really healing, not just managing symptoms, but actually recovering function. He pulled her close, processing this information. 15 years of dysfunction, 15 years of feeling broken, and now this small miracle. Dr. Park said the breakthrough would happen when I finally felt safe enough to be completely vulnerable. I think that's you, Faith. You make me feel safe. Good, she murmured against his chest, because you make me feel brave. They lay in silence for a while, listening to the city sounds through bulletproof windows, two people from different worlds who'd found unexpected healing in each other. For the first time in 15 years, Lee Min-ho felt completely whole. Faith was finishing inventory at her clinic. They'd expanded it after the Bratva incident, added security and equipment, turned it into something more substantial, when Lee burst through the door with an expression she'd learned to recognize. Danger, immediate, serious. We need to leave, now. His voice held barely controlled urgency. Faith knew that tone intimately now. She didn't argue, just grabbed her emergency bag and followed him to the armored vehicle waiting outside, his full security detail deployed. What happened? Rival organization, not Bratva, someone new and more dangerous, the Sinaloa cartel's Chicago operation. He pulled her into the vehicle as his people created a security perimeter. They're making moves, trying to fill the vacuum we created when we pushed out the Russians, and you're the obvious target. They've been watching us, learning our patterns, identifying vulnerabilities. Faith, there's something you need to understand about my world. We just removed a major player. That created a power vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. Now everyone's scrambling to fill it. The cartels, the triads, smaller organizations looking to expand. And they all see you as my greatest weakness, the thing they can use to control or destroy me. Faith felt cold settle in her chest, even as anger sparked. How bad? Bad enough that we're going to ground until I can neutralize the threat. They've put out contracts, 3 separate bounties on you. Highest one is $5 million. They reached his most secure safe house, the one she'd only seen once before. I need you to trust me. Always. She climbed out, her mind already racing through scenarios. What's the plan? Safe house for you with full security detail while No. Faith cut him off, her voice firm despite the fear trying to claw up her throat. We settled this months ago. You don't protect me by hiding me. We face threats together, or we're back to square one and all your progress means nothing. Faith, this isn't like the Bratva. These are professionals, cartel enforcers, trained assassins, people who make the Russians look like amateurs. They won't announce themselves or play by any rules. They'll hit when and where you're vulnerable, and they won't care about collateral damage. Then we need to be smarter than them, more prepared, more strategic. Faith pulled out her phone, opening the clinic's security feeds and her schedule. The clinic has cameras, medical records, patterns of when I'm there. If they're watching me, they're watching that. We use it as the trap again, but this time we don't wait for them to act. We identify them, track them back to their employer, and eliminate the threat at its source before they can mobilize. Lee stared at her, something like pride and fear warring in his expression. You want to hunt them before they hunt you? Best defense is a good offense. You taught me that. Faith met his eyes, letting him see her determination. And I have advantages they won't expect. I'm a nurse. I volunteer in communities all over Chicago, Pilsen, Little Village, back of the yards, places where cartel presence is strong. I see patterns, faces, people who don't belong. If they're setting up surveillance, scouting locations, gathering intelligence, I'll spot them. They'll be looking for a scared victim. Instead, they'll find someone looking back, someone who knows their world. Yuri, who'd been listening from the driver's seat, laughed. I'd told you she was solid, boss. She's thinking like one of us now. This is insane, Lee said, but Faith could see the calculation in his eyes, recognizing the strategic value, weighing risks against benefits, considering angles. This is survival, Faith countered, and you said it yourself. Your world doesn't allow vulnerabilities, so I stop being vulnerable and start being an asset. I've been training with Reyna for months. I know basic tactical operations. I understand your organization's structure and capabilities. Let me help you fight instead of being something you have to protect. The silence in the vehicle was heavy with the weight of decision. Finally, Lee nodded slowly. Okay, but we do this systematically. You don't move without security. Ever. You report anything unusual immediately, and the second I say we're pulling back, we'll discuss it like partners and make a joint decision based on threat assessment and available options, Faith finished. I'm not your subordinate, Lee. I'm your equal partner. We decided this months ago. Equals don't work in my world. There's hierarchy, chain of command, clear authority. Then maybe your world needs to evolve. You've spent 6 months learning to trust me with your vulnerability, with your trauma, with your healing. Time to trust me with your violence, too. Let me help you fight. Let me be more than something you protect. Let me be someone who stands beside you. Lee looked at their joined hands, then out at the Chicago night, his city, his empire, his dangerous world that had never allowed for anything as risky as love or partnership. Then he looked back at Faith, this woman who'd walked into his darkness and refused to let him hide in it, who'd shown him that healing was possible even in the most broken circumstances. Together, he said finally. Together, Faith agreed. As they drove toward the safe house to plan their strategy, neither of them noticed the car following 3 vehicles back, professional distance maintained, cameras capturing their every move. Inside that car, a man with dead eyes and cartel tattoos spoke into an encrypted phone. Confirmed, she's with him, full security detail. They're heading to the lakeside property as predicted. Good, a voice responded, smooth, accented, dangerous. Prepare the team. We move tomorrow night. The contract is clear. $5 million for her, dead or alive, preferably alive. Lee Min-ho needs to learn that nothing he loves is safe. Understood. What about collateral damage? Whatever it takes, send a message he'll never forget. In the safe house, Lee and Faith spread out surveillance photos and intelligence reports, planning their counterstrike with the precision of a military operation. They didn't know they had less time than they thought. Didn't know that tomorrow would bring violence that would test everything they'd built together, everything they'd learned about trust and partnership. But they faced it as they faced everything now. As partners, as equals, as two people who'd found something worth fighting for in a world that wanted to tear it apart. Faith's medical knowledge combined with Lee's tactical experience. Her community connections merged with his intelligence network. Her healing instinct balanced against his protective fury. And outside, in the Chicago night, danger circled closer. Patient and inevitable as death, professional and merciless as a cartel hit squad, bringing with it violence that would challenge everything Faith thought she understood about love and survival. The new threat wasn't just coming, it was already here, watching, waiting, planning, and when it struck, nothing would ever be the same. The threat isn't over. It's never over in Lee's world. But now Faith stands with him, not behind him, not protected by him, but beside him as a true partner. Two people against a darkness that wants to consume them both, armed with love and strategy and the hard-won knowledge that healing is possible even in the most violent circumstances. What happens next will test whether love can survive in a world built on violence, whether partnership can exist when every day brings new threats, whether two people from different worlds can forge something stronger than either world alone, whether Faith's healing touch can coexist with Lee's violent protection. They're about to find out if what they've built together is strong enough to survive what's coming, if their partnership can withstand the ultimate test, if love, in the end, is enough, or if the darkness will finally claim them both. The end.